One of the first large displays that greeted you on entering the Great Hall of the Dublin exhibition, as you can see in James Mahony's drawing of the royal opening, and this is was the plaster version of, you see the plaster version there of this equestrian monument by Carlo Maccaretti, a triumphant equestrian monument to Queen Victoria, and the finished bronze is now in Glasgow. And then here is the Great Hall. We haven't seen this drawing before, but we've seen this wonderful interior. And here is the Queen. Now I've got to put my glasses on. Here is the Queen, somewhere there, with Albert, and she's been greeted by, we presume, the Lord Lieutenant of the time. Complementing Marochetti's statue of the Queen, in the next hall, which is the Fine Arts Hall, which flanked, and if you remember the plan that you saw earlier, I think it was to the left as you looked at the whole building. So complementing Marochetti's statue in a neighbouring hall, the Fine Arts Hall, is yet another Mahony watercolour. And again, you get Victoria and Albert on the left, greeting it's suggested all these chaps in red gowns might be Royal Hibernian Academicians and the like. Anyway, in the next room, so in the first room, as I said, you had Victoria on her horse, and in the next room, you had this statue. There it is there, and here's a detail of it, and it's by John Hogan, and is of Hibernia with a bust of Lord Concurry. So in the neighbouring room stood an Irish sculptural representation of a woman, and here Hibernia, as you can see in the detail, which is in the UCD collection, here Hibernia, wearing laurel leaves on her head, plucks a medieval Irish harp, as you can see on her left. A wolfhound sits at her feet, while her arm embraces the nationalist peer, Valentine Lawless, the second Baron, Cloncurry. Sculptured representations of Ireland and of the British monarchy, both represented by female figures, are displayed in the same building, with Ireland seen in a positive light with no seeming hint of negativity. Newspaper coverage of the exhibition was constant. One commented on, I quote, the mingling of all political shades of seeing the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Dublin, Paul Cullen, no relation, he was supposedly a good priest, and the hottest Orangeman rubbing shoulders during the opening ceremony. For once, the newspaper went on, commented that the jar of Irish politics was drowned by general consent in the anthem and hymn of praise. A new Ireland of toleration and peace under the Union was seemingly afoot. What I'd like to do today is to show how the Dublin exhibition of 1853 was a foretaste of a major transformation of the city's cultural institutions that took place over the next half century. Dublin has no exhibition road comparable to the London thoroughfare in South Kensington, and Tristram Hunt was talking about this yesterday. This road, Exhibition Road, is called after the Great Exhibition, as you have also heard, of 1851, and the links, the Victoria and Albert Museum as it now is, the Natural History Museum, the Science Museum, the Albert Hall, the Albert Memorial, and various other significant establishments. In time, the whole complex, again, as Tristram Hunt said, was nicknamed Albertopolis, after the efforts of Prince Albert to centralise London's cultural institutions. In the decades after the Dublin exhibition, in 1853, Ireland's capital consolidated its own cultural quarter. And this is an aerial view from 1960 with Leinster House. Can you see the pointer? I can't. I have to get my glasses again. Sorry about this. Old age is creeping up. So there's Leinster Lawn. This is where the exhibition took place. This is Leinster House. This is the Natural History Museum, the National Gallery. Before the extensions, this is 1960. And the museum and the library and then the art school was also there. So Ireland's capital consolidated its own cultural quarter centred around Leinster House. And it is there that you find to this day those buildings I've just been telling you. And for well over 150 years, an art school was also in these precincts, but in 1980 it moved elsewhere in the city. Shortly I'll discuss the development of that important cultural quarter around Leinster House. But first, let's go back to 1853. Unlike the Great Exhibition in London in 1851, and as we've mentioned a few times today, the Dublin Exhibition in 1853 displayed a large collection of artworks. Such an initiative was insisted on, I gather, by William Dargan himself, but no record of his actual reasons has come to light, though one could speculate that Dargan wanted to see a National Gallery emerge post the exhibition. One example of the art on show is this painting that's now in the National Gallery, Joseph Haverty's oil painting of the Limerick piper, thought to be a representation of Pádraig Ó Briain with his daughter, and you can see it any day in the Irish Rooms in the National Gallery. It's a highly affecting image of dedicated effort and filial support. Haverty's painting was complemented over the course of the run of the exhibition. We learn from Freeman's Journal and various other newspapers. It was complemented for a period of days by live performances by another contemporary piper, Thomas O'Hannigan, who a few years earlier had played for the Queen on a previous Irish visit in 1849. At the same time, such seeming local colour is in sharp contrast to the display around the corner. And Cora, I think this morning, showed you where the Indian court was, which is, I don't know, 5 minutes walk maybe, which was in the Indian collection, which was largely from the collection of Viscount Gough, an Irish-born military hero of the recent Sikh wars, who lent, and these are a bunch of, this is an old slide from about 1900, 1890s, when they were just these 12-pound howitzers, brass Sikh howitzers and carriages, which were taken in action in the Punjab a few years earlier in 1846. And one of them is still visible. I think, Cora, you mentioned this, in Cullen's Barracks as part of the National Museum. And here you have a slide of the howitzers on display in the central entrance court of the museum with these plaster casts, which I hope just ask you to ignore, actually, in the background. Also, so anyway, you had this Irish painting by Haverty, and then you had these howitzers a few minutes away. But also on show in 1853 were at least 5 portraits of the recently deceased national hero Daniel O'Connell on your left, who had died in 1847. And there were images of O'Connell in a range of material, a range of media, from oils, marbles, carved heads on furniture, which were visible all around the exhibition. In David Wilkie's portrait that you see on your left from the second half of the 1830s, which is on display in the National Gallery at the moment, it's on loan from a bank collection. What you were offered is a portrait of O'Connell as a governor of the National Bank of Ireland, which he had helped found, a bank which was a member of the London Clearing House and had a London headquarters. This triumphalist image of O'Connell as the acceptable face of Irish politics. While nearby, you could also enjoy a full-length portrait of Lord Gough, who's the guy who lent those howitzers I just showed you. And it's a portrait by the little-known artist called James Harwood. And it too is in the National Gallery, but it's presently in storage. So the display of a painting of a humble Irish piper, like the Haverty we saw a minute ago, as well as the actual hearing of pipes in the building, and they must have echoed throughout the chambers, and the display of multitudinous images and references to a political colossus like O'Connell, while also being able to see Gough's Sikh howitzers and his grandiose portrait, as the one on your right, fueled a rather obvious contrast in 1853 between what we might call national awareness and imperial propaganda. Indeed, portraiture was plentiful in the Dublin exhibition. And you can see again in this watercolour by Mahoney that I showed you earlier, you can see many of the portraits hanging on the top tier of the Fine Arts Hall. Despite such underlying cultural tension in the juxtaposition of Irishness and imperial ambition, as far as we can tell from reading accounts in the catalogue of the exhibition, the large number of portraits on display convey a very safe, even conservative visual appearance. As with the 19th century norm, sculptured busts and the full-length statues and paintings of famous men and a few women line the great halls of the exhibition. In the catalogue of the exhibition, we can read lists of names, many now of forgotten celebrities, yet a few still resound through time. From Ireland, apart from O'Connell, there were portraits, and I'm not going to show you, portraits of Jonathan Swift, Wolfe Tone, Thomas Davis, a full length of William Dargan, of course, and then a sculptured bust of his wife, Jane Dargan. Yet the British sitters dominated. We had the Duke of Wellington, several recent prime ministers, various monarchs, including Victoria herself and her family, countless Lord Lieutenants and their wives, as well as portraits from further afield, such as George Washington, Napoleon, as well as the then current kings of Prussia, Holland, the Belgians, and the Emperor of France. One of the big successes, as well as the greatest crowd puller, and we saw that in Liam Kennedy's chart an hour or two ago, one of the big successes, as well as the greatest crowd puller during the 6-month run of the Dublin exhibition, were the 4 royal visits by Victoria and her family in late August into early September. The Queen purchased Irish linens and muslin, as well as facsimile ancient Irish brooches and some bog oak jewellery. A bog oak brooch, which you see in front of you now, with monograms of V and A. I hope you can work out. The V is rather obvious, the A perhaps less so. And this is in the Royal Collection in the United Kingdom, and is thought to have been purchased in Dublin in 1853, possibly from the jeweller William Acheson, who had a display in the Great Hall. And according to what Stephanie Rain said, I guess they ordered it, but they didn't necessarily take it away. But we just don't know. And the Royal Collection website just tells you probably purchased in Dublin in 1853. So I'm going with that bit of information. Anyway, the V on the brooch, as you can see, I hope you can see, is festooned with shamrocks, and the brooch would only be about so big. Again, the rather annoyingly useless website from the Royal Collection doesn't actually give you the dimensions, but a brooch is something that you can wear on your chest, so it can't have been too big. So while native pride may well have been satisfied by such a royal acquisition, the fashion for Irish bog oak, together with its iconography of national sentiment, was not, I would suggest, and must stress, that fashion was not necessarily accompanied by national feeling. The Queen and her party were merely replicating what they had done only 2 years earlier at the London Great Exhibition. That is, supporting native industry and manufacturing, yet with a now transplanted model of international exposition in Ireland. And here is that image that you've seen a few times now from Sproul's catalogue. So despite a terrible famine that had raged and ravaged the island only a few years earlier, and a failed rebellion in 1848, as well as the troubling agitation from the O'Connellites and the anti-O'Connellites, Ireland in 1853 produced a huge exhibition full of hope and expectation. In June, the Freeman's Journal wrote of the great pride in good manufacturing on display. And I quote, "Let Irishmen," they said, "wish it success, talk of it, patronise it, push it on. Out of one factory, make 2 to grow. Out of 2, make 4, and so onwards. Until at last," they went on, "our home market is completely supplied with a native article. And then, why then, we shall think of supplying foreign markets into the bargain." But I would argue such optimism was illusory. Equally, Irish art did not magically blossom. What happened was that Dublin realised that it could make a visual impact on its streetscape with a variety of cultural institutions, many of which are still with us today. It's commonplace to see the creation of the National Gallery of Ireland as one of the key legacies of the 1853 exhibition, and calls for the establishment of a gallery were constant throughout the run of the Dublin exhibition. In 1853, just as the exhibition was drawing to a close, a writer in a Dublin journal referred to the Fine Arts Hall that we saw earlier as, quote, the most perfect collection of pictures that has ever been displayed in this country, going on to say that the ordinary man needs to appreciate painting, but give him training, give him art training, his National Gallery, and he will no longer walk open-mouthed and listless through the halls of our academy. Before the close of the exhibition in October of '53, a Dargan testimonial had been set up to raise funds for a collection of paintings and sculpture to rival that on display over the summer months. Within 10 years, the National Gallery was officially opened in 1864. But what did it contain? Even though Thomas Davis and others in the 1840s and earlier had called for a display of Irish national subjects in art, that did not really happen. While Haverty's The Blind Piper, that you saw a while ago, entered the collection within a year or so of its opening, in the years leading up to that date, 39 16th and 17th century largely religious and mythological Italian and French paintings were purchased in Rome from monies given to the National Gallery by the Lord Chancellor of Ireland, Sir Maziere Brady, who was also a member of the Board of Governors and Guardians. Some of these paintings, such as the Lanfranco on your left of the Loaves and Fishes, along with his companion Lanfranco's Last Supper, the Loaves and Fishes is on display, and I just checked yesterday, in the Milltown rooms of the National Gallery. Some of these paintings, such as the two Lanfrancos, would have conveniently hung on the vast walls of the newly built Queen's Gallery. And this is a sketch by, not a sketch, this is a ground plan by Francis Folk. And those of you who were at Tristram Hunt's talk last night, he mentioned what Folk had done at the V&A. And this is the first building of the National Gallery, which what is now called the Dargan Wing, I think. And this would have been the entrance here, which was then knocked down, and the Milltown collection, the main entrance that we now go through, or at least on the Marion Square side, was there. Anyway, this was what's now called the Shaw Rooms, and then you went up, and then there were to be other facilities, which I won't go into, and you went up this grand staircase, and then the Queen's Gallery was this 2-floor, huge space with various smaller galleries or offices. So the design that you see here is the proposed floor plan by Francis Folk, who was a Tyrone-born, a captain of the Royal Engineers, and he is a key figure in designing so many aspects, as we heard the other night, of the newly constructed South Kensington Museum. While Michael Wynne, former curator of the National Gallery, claimed in his 1986 catalogue of the later Italian paintings in the National Gallery that it would be facile, he said, to say that the initial purchase, and you can see I've written down the measurements, the painting is about 420 centimetres wide. He said it would be facile to say that the initial purchase of these paintings, and many of them are huge, was motivated by their large size. But as much as I was very fond of Michael Wynne, I must disagree with him. Yards of canvas were needed in the 1860s to fill the large spaces now available, and the Lord Chancellor's gift was certainly fortuitous. Dublin's new gallery did not benefit from generous gifts such as those given by Sir George Beaumont back in 1828, which eventually led to the foundation of the London National Gallery. Despite the plentiful loans of Old Master paintings to the 1853 exhibition from Irish aristocratic collections, Dublin was just not so fortunate, although important gifts did materialise in decades to come. The privileging of Old Master art appears on the outside of the original National Gallery, which is not a not uncommon move in museum and gallery decorations. So that this is the original facade of the National Gallery. I've cropped this photograph with the 1903 extension, which is the front you see now, off to your right. So this is the original, and this looks out over Leinster Lawn, this bit on your right here. And what I'm interested in are these little plaques, just there, and then all the way along the side, which are very difficult to read due to the fact that Leinster House is now our parliament. You can't get in there, without a policeman jumping on you. Along the side, that's Leinster Lawn side, names like Raphael, Michelangelo, Titian, Velázquez, and various others were inscribed just below the roof on the Leinster Lawn facade. But names of even older artists also appeared, so that on the facade you're looking at here, you can't read them, and just accept my word for it. I couldn't get a photograph of anything closer. This actually says Apelles, and this one over here says Phidias. So the names of even older artists from those old masters that I've just mentioned, such as Phidias, the Greek sculptor, appeared on the outside of the building. And casts of what was supposed to be his work appeared in what's now called the showroom, which, if you go back to that ground plan, this is the facade here that we're looking at, and this is the room which then had all these casts. Casts of what was supposed to be Phidias's work appeared inside the new gallery. In 1861, the British Museum sent over 16 cases of plaster casts that included famous figures of what could be, and can you see, I can't without my glasses, you can see casts from the Parthenon in Athens, and you can see a figure of thought to be Theseus, but it could be Hercules, or it could be Dionysus, from the east pediment of the Parthenon, which can be seen at the end of the room in this photograph taken about 1890. Meanwhile, the National Gallery in London gave a loan of about 28 oil paintings, some of which were still in the National Gallery of Ireland well into the 20th century. So it could be suggested that London seemed to have had a firm say in what was on display in Dublin. Given the dominance of the portraiture in the 1853 Dublin exhibition, a national portrait collection within the National Gallery of Ireland was not surprisingly an early experiment in national awareness. But as I've outlined elsewhere in far greater detail, political interference from Westminster soon raised its head. With the existence of a National Portrait Gallery in London that had been founded in 1856, an 1872 letter from the Treasury in London to the National Gallery of Ireland's Board of Governors informed the Dublin institution that, quote, provision is already made by Parliament for a National Gallery of Portraits of distinguished personages where eminent Irishmen are represented indiscriminately with Englishmen and Scotchmen, and that it would materially lessen the importance and interests of this general and essentially national collection if separate and competing galleries were to be established in Dublin and in Edinburgh, and thus confining respectively to portraits of Irish and Scottish celebrities. Across Leinster Lawn, which, as you hopefully now got the geography, is about here, across Leinster Lawn had been erected and opened in 1856, prior to the National Gallery, the Natural History Museum, while on the other side of Leinster House, on Kildare Street, a National Museum, which you see here, and then opposite it, a National Library, opened in 1890, both designed by the Irish father and son team of Thomas Newnham and Thomas Manley Dean, and are what Christine Casey sees as a tour de force, I quote from her Dublin book, a tour de force in picturesque composition. And this is a photo from about the late 1890s. And of course, this is a photo before the forecourt of Leinster House became the home of John Hughes's colossal monument to Victoria of 1908, which I'll discuss in a moment. And then, of course, it became a car park, which you might remember. And then I think it's still a bit of a car park. I saw some cars there yesterday. And then it eventually became that high security zone, which you cannot enter unless you're a member of Parliament, that you use leading up to that building, which is the home of the Irish Parliament. Inside Dean's great building, which you see here on the left, a clear decorative design is in evidence. The carved wooden doors that you see all over the Kildare Street and the museum building, the carved wooden doors feature in both the National Museum and the National Library, as does the abundance of mosaic flooring. In the ceramic doorways on your left, we can see a debt to the Renaissance-like Victoria and Albert aesthetic. Or I'm using Victoria and Albert as the building. The building, of course, was not called that. It was called the South Kensington Museum at that time. Such as the staircase on your right, which is from a 1870s drawing of the ceramic staircase, which is still there today, but this is a late 19th century version of it, as in Moody's ceramic staircase of 1860s. While the Dublin doors and mosaic floorings are much more subdued in appearance, particularly the doorways, the colourful modelling of both wood and maiolica are stylistic indicators of the dominance of an all-pervasive South Kensington style. In 1871-2, John Henry Foley's double-tiered monument to Prince Albert, and who was it? Somebody earlier today showed a coloured picture postcard. Was it Stephanie? Was it you? Of Foley's monument to Prince Albert, which you see here on Leinster Lawn. And just to make sure you understand the location of everything, this is the National Gallery. So Leinster House is about there, and it's looking out onto Merrion Square. So Foley's double-tiered monument to Prince Albert, who had died a decade earlier, was erected on Leinster Lawn after controversy over where to site the statue. Foley's monument, as in this late 19th century photograph, stood in the very centre, on the very site of Leinster Lawn, on the very site of the Dublin exhibition of 20 years earlier, facing out towards Merrion Square. Albert is shown, and you've got to again take my word for it, he's shown wearing around his neck the collar and badge of the Irish Order of St. Patrick, just as his wife would wear it in John Hughes's bronze monument of 1908, which we'll see in a moment. Around 1950, Foley's Albert monument was moved from the centre of the lawn to the left by the Natural History Museum, where it still stands to this day. So with that museum, that is the Natural History Museum, and then the National Gallery, which you can see on the right of this photograph. So with the museum and the National Gallery on either side, the erection in the 1870s of a monument to Albert was oddly appropriate, I would argue. Back in 1853, the London Art Journal had claimed that the Dublin exhibition was, and I quote, the first practical and beneficial result of the labours, mental and physical, of Prince Albert on behalf of British art industry. And indeed, you could say that those labours are represented allegorically by the male youths who stand below the figure of Albert. Here, as you can see, and as Paula Murphy has informed us in her work, we see industry, art, and science with agriculture. You can't see agriculture at the back. And what is being celebrated in Foley's monument is what has become to be known as Albertine Ireland, which has been defined by the historian who coined the phrase, James H. Murphy, as a longing for an Ireland that was progressive and scenic rather than backward and brutal. In the 1860s, a decade after the exhibition, a select commission set up by the Science and Art Department in Ireland, which operated under the direct supervision of the London Department of the same name, recommended that, and I quote, certain institutions should be concentrated in a convenient locality, forming in groups a science and an art museum, a public library, and a school of art. So if we try now to, and this is a bird's eye view of the whole Leinster House complex, if we try and ignore the fact that Leinster House, which is, that Leinster House, which is there, is now the home of the Oireachtas of the Irish Parliament. And just remember that in 1893, when this bird's eye view was drawn, Leinster House was the centre of all the activities of the Royal Dublin Society, whose efforts lie behind so much of what we've been discussing today. That former ducal house was surrounded, as we can see in this sketch, by an imperial construct of cultural institutions. And just to remind you, we have the museum, and this is Kildare Street. We have the museum, and we have the library, we have an art college, art school in there, we have the National Gallery, and we have the Natural History Museum. So I'm suggesting this whole imperial construct of cultural institutions, which were in short a recreation in Dublin of London's Albertopolis in South Kensington. But the transformation of Dublin into a celebration of Victoria and Albert needed another ingredient. In the early years of the 20th century, Thomas Manley Dean, the son in that Dean company that I've been talking about, went on to design the plinth of Hughes's Victoria Monument that you see on your right here. This monument, this huge essay in stone and bronze dedicated to the now deceased Victoria, was unveiled in 1908 by the Lord Lieutenant of the time. As an initiative of the Royal Dublin Society, in front of whose headquarters it sits, and Leinster House would be just here, and this is the library. Hugh's monument was ostensibly a commemoration of Ireland's contribution to the recent Anglo-Boer War, as indicated in the allegorical bronze grouping, a detail of which you see on your left, at the very base of this very tall, possibly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's about 4.5 meters tall, this pedestal. It is, this allegorical grouping at the very base is also, the whole ensemble is unwittingly, I would argue, on the part of the Royal Dublin Society, a nod to the fact that 55 years earlier, the Queen had visited the Great Exhibition in this whole Leinster House complex, where, as I've said, she noted that statue on the left by Hogan. She would have seen Hogan's mid-19th century Hibernia. The iconography of Hibernia had not changed much in the 60-year gap between the two sculptures. We see a draped female figure, a harp, the harp of, and the Hogan is there. In this one, Erin is leaning on a harp. And Laurel reads on the Hogan on the left, she's wearing them in her hair, and in the Hughes, she's proffering them in her right hand. So the iconography of Hibernia hadn't changed much. If the Queen did stroll, no proof on this, if the Queen did stroll around the forecourt of Leinster House, that is on the Kildare Street side, during one of her 4 visits to the Great Exhibition of 1853, she would have visited the displays of craftwork from, and again we saw on the ground plan that were shown earlier, what all these different bits of the exhibition were. She would have visited the displays of craftworks from Irish prisons and workhouses, stained glass collections, carriages, and the agricultural department. Inside the central hall of the exhibition, she and her husband may also have just purchased or requested the bog oak brooch that I showed earlier, and here it is again to remind you. Festooned, as I said, with shamrocks, a botanical symbol of Ireland that reappeared on the insignia of the Order of St. Patrick on Hughes's monument some 50-odd years later. And here in the centre is what the insignia looks like, festooned with harps and shamrock in the badge and in the star, which is the thing on the top centre. And then you can see this is the bronze monument to Victoria. On your left is a detail. It's now in Australia, in case you want to go and check, but you've got a long way to go. And the insignia is, and the collar is around her neck with the badge dangling between her breast, and the star is on her left breast. But if the iconography of Hibernia had not changed much, as I said a minute ago, in the half century or so between the exhibition and this monument, what had changed by the early years of the 20th century were Irish attitudes to the monarchy. During her final visit to Ireland in 1900, Victoria was frequently labelled the Famine Queen, while back in 1853, held only a few years since the actual famine, no such antagonism was forthcoming as far as I know. I mean, there were a few. The Nation, for example, was kind of moan a bit, but nothing seriously derogatory. So what did 1853 do for Ireland? Well, I'd like to offer two conclusions. While the exhibition aspired to encourage Irish productivity in all spheres, it did not really succeed. And I now, for reasons, I do not want that. No, something's happened to my wonderful little display here. I just want to, can I go back to the whole, to the original, press escape?
Yes, you
and then I just go, how do I get rid of these?
Were they an animation?
Elimination?
An animation.
Animation, yeah.
Okay, this is a PDF, so you can't.
Sorry?
So this is just a
I just want to get rid of those and then I bring them on again.
This is a static image. So
yeah, but I shouldn't I? Oh.
So what we'll do instead.
Okay, it doesn't matter that much.
Is the PowerPoint still?
It's just, I want to, no, just go back to the whole, thing. I was just going to show you a really swizzy bit of technical know-how that my son taught me the other day. And you're not going to get it because it's not happening.
No, it is. We're going to find
just go back to the last slide of my presentation. Sorry about this.
Okay. So we can continue as you were, or we can take 3 or 4 minutes to find this. What would you prefer?
What's happened?
So
The event files or the PowerPoint.
yeah, thank you. Okay, where are you?
Is this?
This is your.
This is the PowerPoint.
This is the original that I sent over?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the mood.
Is it going to?
There we go. Just takes a moment to load.
Okay, can we go to, get rid of that? Go to this slideshow.
That's my desk. So
Keep going. You've got to, that one's the last one. I want to get rid of those images and bring them on again in my own time. That's it. Okay, super. So what did 1853 do for Ireland? So I'm going to offer you two conclusions. While the exhibition aspired to encourage Irish productivity in all spheres, I don't think it really succeeded. The example I have just given, and this is my little pushing in, the example I've just given of one of the most attractive internal features of the decorative scheme in the National Museum was not carried out by an Irish craftsman. Carlo Cambi, who carved the doors in the National Museum and the National Library, was an Italian who, it is thought, never came to Ireland and sent his designs by post, while the Mallorca surrounds were designed and executed by Bermontoffs of Leeds. It is true that some Irish-based craftswork was produced in both buildings, be it additional woodwork and the wrought iron supports for the museum's glass roof. Yet in their extensive use of the heavily carved doorways, colourful ceramic surrounds and vivid mosaic flooring, the Deans in the 1880s had to look abroad for decorative designers. While there are a variety of reasons why in the wake of the 1853 exhibition this decision was made to employ the likes of Campi and Bermontoff's company, the Royal Dublin Society, which oversaw the direction of the Dublin schools of drawing, for reasons of taste and I think perhaps artistic elitism, resisted what John Turpin suggests succinctly, and I quote him, the utilitarian vocationalism that was so central to the South Kensington system. Yet given that the South Kensington system was driven by a design for industry, such an approach just did not work in Ireland, where industry was not as advanced as in England. The Irish results of the South Kensington system are thus to be seen less in the artefacts, or in artefacts, and more, I would argue, in institutions. While the 1853 exhibition made Dublin an exciting place for a few months, it also showed the ongoing tension between national aspirations and the power of union and the power of empire. In my opinion, the most tangible legacy is a series of impressive imperial structures around Leinster House, which I've just been discussing. On the Kildare Street side, from 1908, with the unveiling of Hughes's great monument to Victoria, and you should now get that, you do, flanked as it was for about 40 years by the National Museum of Ireland, by the National Library of Ireland, as well as by the Dublin Metropolitan School of Art, later named the National College of Art, and then passing over Leinster House onto Leinster Lawn and onto the Merrion Square side, and taking in the Natural History Museum, which is on your right, and passing the Albert Memorial, which was there up until 1950, in the middle, that is, and then moving on to the National Gallery of Ireland on the left of the lawn, from your perspective. One could see the whole thing forming, at least for the years, and I think about 40 years, between 1908 and about 1950. The whole thing forms for about 40 years, I would argue, when all those elements were in place, an Irish Albertopolis. Thank you.